Harvesting and curing popcorn might seem a little difficult, especially if you're a beginner, if you've never done it before, and especially if you've clicked on this video thinking, I didn't even know I had to cure popcorn. Yeah, it can seem like it's a little difficult, but it's actually not that hard, and I'm going to lead you through the entire process. So I've got one of my patches of popcorn right here behind me, and some of them are ready to harvest and some of them are not, and I'm going to show you what to look for. This one right here is not ready to harvest. You can see the husk is still fully green on it. The leaves of the plant are also green. The stalk is green. And this is like about where you might start thinking about picking sweet corn, is maybe even a little underripe for sweet corn. But with popcorn, you're going to want to wait much longer than sweet corn before taking it off the plant. This one is getting much closer. You can see the husk is starting to turn brown, but the leaves of the plant, well, this other leaf wants to get in the way, the leaves of the plant here are still quite green. They are starting to turn brown here, but this one I would leave a little bit longer. Now this one, if you take a look at it, even though it's like on the smaller side, you can see the husk is fully brown here, and the stalk of the plant also turned brown. This is about where we want to be. All you're going to do to harvest is just pull it right off the plant like that. All right, so that is your general rule of thumb when harvesting popcorn, but now we're going to go over when that is not the case. So first of all, I want to show you guys this one I just picked. You can see how this outer husk is starting to look a little bit moldy. You can kind of see some of the spots on it. And so that is a major reason why you might not leave your popcorn outside all the way until everything is brown and dry, because they can start to mold. So what you're trying to balance here is maximum amount of time drying outside on the stalk versus is it going to get too wet and mold. And you know, that's something that you kind of have to guess at. You have to do by feel. But once your corn is finished growing, that's when you kind of have to start watching the weather and saying, okay, like, yeah, it might rain today, but is it going to dry out afterwards? Is it still hot enough outside that I trust that these stalks are going to dry out and not stay wet and mold? So if you need to pick your corn earlier, as long as it is finished growing, you can absolutely pick it early and finish some of the drying inside. And even if you are picking it at about the optimal time, there is still going to be a drying and curing period. So what we're doing is just kind of doing half of that outside when we're leaving the corn on the stalk to dry. All right, let's go ahead and peel this and take a look at what we've got. So I like to leave the stalks on my popcorn because, like I said, I am gonna have to bring it inside and cure it some more, and I think they just look prettier with their little husks still on them. I am going to pull off all of this silk, and we are left with a really cute little purple cob. Every single one of these that I unwrap is a different color, by the way, because this is a glass gem popcorn. It's from the Experimental Farm Network if you wanted to get yourself any. But looking at these kernels, you can absolutely see, if you know what you're looking for, that they are not fully dry yet. They're still kind of plump and brightly colored. So if you're used to looking at sweet corn, this looks kind of like sweet corn except for pretty colorful. And I'm going to show you what these look like when they're fully dried. Here's another one that I've just pulled off the plant. Because I am starting to see mold on the outer husks, I am going to start pulling them, I think, even if they're not like fully dry on the stalks. Like I said, you know, you're just kind of watching for those signs, and the outer papers are moldy, but they will mold before the inside molds. So that does kind of give you a little bit of time, a little bit of a sign, so you know when you kind of have to get serious about pulling them. Oh wow, this one's like almost entirely purple. Look at that. That is absolutely gorgeous. Every single one of these is different, I swear. These are like the first purple ones that I've seen. But once again, this looks a lot like sweet corn. The kernels are very shiny and plump, and if you were to stick your fingernail into one of them, you can absolutely dent it. All right, here's a few more that I picked and peeled off camera. You can see there's quite a color variation there, and it is really pretty. And fun fact, like this one that's like mostly purple, if I was to pick out all the most purple kernels and plant only those, I would get mostly purple popcorn back out. So that's just kind of a fun thing you can do in your garden. But yeah, we're gonna take these inside and I'm gonna kind of show you the difference between these really fresh ones and the ones that are pretty dry. All right, so let's compare one of these ones that we just picked with one that has been drying inside for about a week now. So first things first, you can see that there's a little bit of a difference in size. I think this one was slightly smaller to start with, but they will kind of shrink up a little bit as they dry because some of that moisture is leaving them. And so what you're looking for, as you're looking for whether or not your popcorn is dry enough, is if you can dent the kernels with your thumbnail. So these ones are way too hard to leave a dent, and these ones are very noticeably softer and kind of malleable. And they also, when I run my fingernails across them, these feel much drier than these ones. And once they get to this state where you're like, okay, this is probably dry, like the texture you would expect from popcorn, then you start getting into testing, because you cannot look at this and tell whether or not it has the exact right moisture for popping. The moisture content that we're looking for is somewhere between 13 and 14% for the maximum amount of pop for your popcorn. And you can go about figuring this out in a few different ways. There are some ways that you can measure it. I'm going to show you a very easy way you can measure it today without any special equipment. But you can also do some pop tests, and I will also show you how to do that. In the meantime, while you are waiting on your popcorn to dry, you can bundle them up all nicely and hang them up somewhere. They make a beautiful fall decoration, and yeah, you can literally just hang them on your walls to have them dry. You probably don't want to hang them in direct sunlight or, you know, somewhere that's going to change temperature a lot. But, you know, most areas in your house are going to be fine. I've had some hung up on my walls for a long time, and they look pretty, and they're also just sitting there drying the whole time. The amount of time that you are going to have to let them dry is going to depend on how long you let them dry outside first. So the total amount of drying time that you're looking for from like fresh to fully dry is about 6 weeks. Some of that can happen outside, some of that can happen inside. You know, it can be a mix depending on, you know, just the circumstances that you're having to harvest your corn in, right? And once you kind of reach that like 6 week mark, that's when you will see that they look really quite dry, and you're going to start all this testing. All right, so this first method of testing, pop testing, this is, I think, the easiest, the most accessible way to determine whether or not your popcorn is the correct amount of dryness. It's perfect for you if you are somebody who is a little bit afraid of math. And if you are somebody who's like, please give me the numbers, then the next method is going to be a little bit better for you. So what you do in a pop test is you basically count out a specific number of kernels. I like to do 20 kernels. You know, pop them the way that you would normally pop them. For me, that's in a pot on the stove. And then once they're done popping, you pour them out and you kind of count and you look at how they've popped. And based on how they look, you're kind of able to guess whether or not they're in the right range of moisture. The first thing I did was I went and got a control popcorn from the store. I got just, you know, the standard popcorn kernels that you can pop at home. And I went ahead and did a pop test on them, and I got, you know, what looks like a normal sized popcorn. And this is going to be your standard that you kind of compare your own kernels to. Now, a caveat here is that some varieties of popcorn that you might grow might have smaller or larger kernels than the ones from the store. So definitely keep that in mind when you're comparing the pops. We're going to start with what it looks like when the popcorn has way too much moisture. So you will actually see that they will pretty much not pop at all. They might kind of crack a little bit, but mostly you're not going to see any popped kernels if your popcorn is far too wet. Once you start getting closer to the right moisture content, you'll see that your popcorn will pop, but it'll be like really small and really dense. And that's a sign that you're on the way, but you're definitely not there yet to the correct moisture content. On the other hand, if you do let it go too far, you let it get too dry, then you will also see much smaller pops. And then the difference between the small if it's too dry and the small if it's too wet is sort of the fluffiness. So if it's too dry, you will get a fluffier pop, but it will still be really small. And if it's too wet, you will get a small pop that is more dense and less fluffy. You can also look at just how many kernels pop. The more dry one is going to have more kernels pop than the more wet one, because the chances are that if it's still just a little too moist, there's going to be some in there that are still in the far too moist category. So that's also going to give you a little bit of a hint. But also additionally, you're going to know kind of based on how long you've been letting them dry. And if you're testing them every week or so, then you're going to find that you are pretty sure whether or not it's too wet or too dry. So alternatively, if you do want to be a little bit more exact, you can use this next method. It does require a little math, like I said, but I promise you can do it. It's very simple. So all you're going to do is you're going to take some of the kernels off of one of your cobs and you are going to weigh them. Now, as you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're in the range of what your kitchen scale can actually measure. Most kitchen scales are not going to go down to like 1 or 2 kernels. You're going to have to get up into the like 10 to 20 grams ish of popcorn kernels. And once you've done that, once you've got that number, you write it down and then you're going to grind up your kernels. And we're going to do this so that they dry out really fast. So I am going to use an old coffee grinder. You can use a mortar and pestle. You can use a grain mill, anything that you have that's going to do the job. And once you've done that, you are then going to stick them in the oven at 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 hours. And that's going to make sure that all of that moisture has fully evaporated. Once you've done that, then you are going to weigh your popcorn again. And then the difference in weight is going to be the measurement of the water that was previously in the popcorn kernels. So now you have the weight of the water that was in there, but that's still not a percentage, right? So to change that into a percentage, you take the weight of the water that you just calculated over the original weight that you measured. And then once you divide that, it is going to spit out a percentage in decimal form. So you'll have to move the decimal over a couple of times, and that is your percentage. So like in our other experiment, you are going to want to have a control. So you're going to take that store-bought popcorn and you are also going to do the same thing to it. Because there's going to be losses, like there's going to be things like, oh, well, some of it doesn't get out of the grinder and maybe some of it doesn't make it back onto the scale, and maybe there's a little bit of variance in how your scale measures, like it only measures to the 0.1 grams, maybe some of the difference is going to be lost in that measurement. And so what you want to do is you want to have something to compare whatever you've done to. So you're going to look at whatever your standard, your control comes out to be, and you are hoping to get your own to basically match your control. This method can be especially useful if perhaps, like me, you had some popcorn hanging on the wall and you totally forgot about it, and you know that it's been there for a year and it got way too dry, and now you still want to save it. So what you can do is you can actually calculate how much water you need to add back to your popcorn to make it normal, make it pop again. And there is another equation for that we'll go over. All right, so after that calculation, we find that our control is at about 16% hydration, whereas our test is at about 11.5% hydration. And so what we're going to do is we're going to calculate how much moisture we need to add back in order to get our popcorn up to that 14%. Now our control was at 16, which is just a little bit high. It is entirely possible that that is the real moisture content. It is also possible that that is part of the error in our calculations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate for 14% moisture content on my dry popcorn. And then if it's still dry after that, then I will go ahead and add enough water to up its percentage 2 more points. So you're going to take the bulk weight of the popcorn that you need to rehydrate, so weigh everything that needs water, and multiply that by 1 minus the percent moisture that it currently has. And just a note that this percentage is going to be represented in decimal form in this formula. So 1 minus the decimal form of the current moisture content, and then all of that divided by 1 minus the target moisture content, again in decimal form. And then once you have that number, you're then going to subtract the bulk weight from that, and that will give you number of grams of water to add to all that popcorn that you were trying to rehydrate. You're going to let that popcorn sit in a sealed jar with the water overnight, and then you are going to retest the popping of that popcorn. Or if you really want, you can also retest the actual moisture content of some of those kernels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save my little pop test from today, and then I'm going to compare that to the theoretically properly hydrated kernels tomorrow. All right, it's the next day and our popcorn has fully soaked up the water from last night. You can see it doesn't look wet in there anymore. Everything, it's fully soaked in, and when I reach in and touch it, it doesn't feel wet either. It's definitely all soaked into the kernels. So let's pop this and compare it to what it looked like yesterday. All right, so let's look at what we just popped. So to me, these are definitely looking better than what we had yesterday, especially, you know, something like this, something like this. If we take one of these over here to yesterday's popcorn, you can definitely see the size difference there in these two batches of popcorn. Now, if you also kind of zoom out between the two piles, these were both 20 kernels that were put in there and popped, and you can see the like relative size difference of the piles. That's really showing you that, you know, the majority of these did pop at least somewhat bigger than these. And also we have a few unpopped kernels in here, which makes this pile look a little bit smaller. So definitely this is looking like it's moving in the right direction. The fact that I still have some that are looking like, okay, that's a pretty tight, small pop, you know, and that one and that one. The fact that there's like, I don't know, at least 5 or 6 in there. That's making me think that although we're moving in the right direction, we could potentially add even more moisture to this popcorn. So what I'm going to do is, using the math from yesterday, I'm going to assume that we got this up to our target moisture because we added the exact right amount of water. And I am then going to use that formula again to calculate how much extra water I need to add to this to bring it up another percentage point in moisture. And then from there, I'm just going to keep going on and testing and adding or not, etc., until I get exactly what I want out of this popcorn. All right, so all of the math that we used in this video is going to be in the description below for you to come back to. You can copy paste it, you can keep it. Hopefully that ends up being really, really helpful for you. And if you did really enjoy this video and you found that it helped you out, please consider joining me on Patreon and supporting me that way. For as little as $1 a month, you actually get access to these videos early and ad-free. So that link is also going to be in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I wish you all happy gardening.